This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, we are recording and it's time to begin. Thank you everyone for joining this session of a Career Roundtable, part of the H3Africa meeting. We are, of course, accommodating the changes that have been thrust upon us at the last minute here and are very respectful of the circumstances by which we are meeting virtually today. We are mindful of those who are suffering with this COVID-19 coronavirus and others who suffer from other things, and that's of course why we're here. Let us begin our Career Roundtable. Hopefully you have received a booklet describing the participants who will be on this panel. The format of the panel is that we have 9 speakers. One of our speakers had to drop out at the last moment. 9 speakers who will address various topics. Each of the speakers will address their topics, and after we have generally 2 or 3 speakers per topic. Those speakers will address the topic, share some of their experiences, and then we will ask some questions. And the floor will be open for especially the trainees to ask questions related to the topic. Following those questions, we'll move on to the next topic. And at the end, we'll have a general open session for questions related to the topics or other questions that might come up throughout the discussion. My practice will be to mute my microphone and camera when I am not the one speaking, and so that we can focus on the speakers. Also, given how this session works, that it's going to be a quick succession of speakers, I'm going to dispense with the formal introductions. The booklet gives you much greater information about all of our individual speakers. Let's just acknowledge and offer and render all appropriate honors to those who are speaking. We should also acknowledge that every one of our speakers has distinguished themselves in their career and have overcome significant obstacles to get to where they are, just like everyone else who's participating. Thank you for your respect and participation. Our first speakers are Dr. Daudi Jingo and Dr. Gerald Mbua. They're coming to us from Uganda, and they'll be addressing the topic of postdoc to PI, the challenges and benefits. They're joined together, so I'll let them take it away from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren, for getting this together. So, postdoc to PI, that's definitely a very challenging thing, and I'll just say a few of my experiences. It's good you've already sort of addressed the issue of background that's already in the books, and I'm sure our fellows will be able to access that as and when they need. So I'll go straight to just sharing really a few insights about the transition from postdoc to PI, but also really from PhD to postdoc, which is where between us here, that's the kind of spectrum where we lie. So I think one of the challenges really is that, especially in our ecosystem here, because of the paucity or the lack of enough skills, at least in the field of bioinformatics, but also in a lot of related fields, but also just a dire lack of PhDs in the entire ecosystem generally. I think one of the challenges one usually quickly runs into is just the extra scientific work that they have to do, work that has little to do with research, classical research, and publishing, but then work that is admin, but then also systemic. So For example, here, as some of the people on this call might know, we've spent a good bit of the last 3 years or so really just working on putting up the right infrastructure and what that takes in terms of compute. You know, writing curriculum and getting those together and trying to mobilize people to teach a program like this. And then between all of that, of course, do teaching, which a lot of post-PhD postdoc people have to deal with. But on top of the teaching, you have to do all this other administrative work. And so I think one of the things you quickly learn that just being able to properly manage your time becomes absolutely key. But then above all, just the realization that sometimes, especially in this ecosystem, you may not necessarily take the classical or the typical path, but that sometimes you might need to just put up the infrastructure first and the systems first in the first place before you can even do any research. And just being able to recognize that need and giving it the time and bandwidth that it requires, I think is sort of a very important thing. And very closely related to that is even the idea of what one might consider their specialization, quote unquote. Of course, after a PhD or even a postdoc, usually you might have a certain training, a certain skill set, and by definition, usually that skill set is very targeted and sometimes narrow. So it becomes important to have the flexibility. So for example, one of the things that we have had to address here, in my specific instance, but I know also in my colleague Gerald, is our training is in bioinformatics. But when you get in the program here and in the ecosystem here, you quickly realize there's a lot of need around artificial intelligence. There's also need around digital systems. So this is more like the health informatics side of health needs, you know, apps and developments and that sort of thing. And usually in this kind of ecosystem, everybody will look around and say, oh, you are the guy who knows something about computing at the doctoral level. And you have to help because there's no other person to do it. And so I think even the need of recognizing that there are fields or domains that may be a little bit outside of yours but related, that you may have to turn your eyes and hands on and give them their best, if only to sort of kickstart them so that others can begin. So that becomes a very important skill and information to be aware of when
Dr. Jingo, thank you very much for your remarks. I am sorry to cut you off. We do have only a very brief amount of time. And any last thought before you close for now?
No, I think others might come in recognition of time. I think I'll mention others as we go along.
Excellent. Dr. Mbua, the time is yours for the next 3 minutes or so.
Okay, so thank you, Daryl, for the opportunity to speak to the fellows about the transition from PhD and postdoc to PI. So much of that has been said by my senior, Dr. Jingo. So what I realized, this journey needs someone to a little bit move faster and recognize their potentials and which teams are locally available to work with them. So for my case, I had to realize that there at least some groundwork had been done. Dr. Jingo and Dr. Katete had started the initiative here regarding bioinformatics. So before I finished my PhD, I had to request to work with them in that aspect. That time they are working on the curriculum for master's and PhD in bioinformatics. So that was a soft landing for my case. And they made life easy for me, that's what I can say. So I had to work with them, developing the curriculum, and within no time it was approved for as a university program. So that made life easy. And what I had to do next was to get involved in the training or teaching, which I do every week. Yeah, and then when it comes to funding, still you have to teach and also write research grants. So I had to also write some small grants. And it is not a clear line because you have to be taught or you have to understand the art or the science of writing grants. So I had to look around for some grants that were not so much very costly, like in terms of the available amount of money to be given to a researcher who is just transitioning from PhD to postdoc. So I had to look around and I saw Bill and Melinda Gates' call, which was posted in 2018, around June. So it was a call of using innovative technologies to understand antimicrobial resistance. So I put in my application utilizing whole genome sequencing and bioinformatics to understand the transmission dynamics of drug-resistant bacteria at Malabon National Referral Hospital. So that was kind of the trend I had to look around. And even then, after that, I had to look around for some other opportunities, small grants that don't go beyond 100,000 USD. But a few haven't been successful. On the other two of them, which are about 10,000 US dollars, I've managed to get them. So that's how the journey has been. And maybe officially, IDEA also put up a call where they wanted someone to work as a bioinformatics scientist. And he could have to apply for that position, which went through. That's all, though. I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mbua, for your comments and perspective as well. It seems that you thought that learning how to write grants, the two of you thought about, Dr. Jingo mentioned how important it was to manage time and to establish infrastructure. Dr. Mbua talked about how important it is to learn how to write a grant and taking time to really investigate the lay of all the opportunities. I'd like to open up the session. If anybody wants to ask these two researchers a question about their journey from postdoc to PI, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. As you think about questions, maybe I can start. Dr. Jingo and Dr. Mbua, can you maybe help us to understand why you even wanted to become a PI or a postdoc or have an academic post in the first place? What was the attraction for this kind of higher education?
Right, that's a very pertinent question, Darrow. And as everybody knows, that is sort of a choice that somebody starts to think about as far back as high school. But then, of course, at that age, you're not able to definitively choose, even at an undergraduate level. But in my specific case, actually, the attraction centered around the dual ability to do research and discovery on the one hand, basically be on the frontier of scientific discovery, and the chance to mentor and train and teach a sort of next generation of people that are skilled in the same areas. And so for me, the dual attraction of research and education and mentorship was something that I found very attractive. And you know, engaging with younger colleagues and this kind of thing, which is usually sort of can be done in a lot of other fields, but it's especially pertinent in research academia.
That's great. Can I follow up on this idea of, oh, I'm sorry, is there a question from the floor?
There's a question in the chat box. Thanks, Drs. Dowdy and Mbua. Have you had a challenge choosing between industry and academia?
Yeah, so if I may take and to try to answer what Rita is asking here is, first, I try to put freedom ahead of most of what I have to consider next. So when I try to look at industry, there's minimal to little freedom. That's what I can say. But when it comes to academia, you have a lot of freedom to do much of what you may want to do. So that's what I can say when it comes to choosing between industry and academia. I chose academia because I'm considering freedom to do much of what I want to do under academia.
Right, and maybe just a small rejoinder, which is that so in our ecosystem, industry is something that is as still primordial as academia itself. So the choices around that were not many, at least for somebody with this level of training, and I think that sort of made that choice a little bit easier. And a lot of industry in our ecosystem tends to want skills at our level on an ad hoc basis, which is that, you know, they might ask you, and we have done a bit of that myself on board, to go in and give them some level of consultancy and that sort of thing, but it's on a short-term basis. And I think that is still good for us because it gives us insights into industry, and we're able to align our research and academia a little bit better with industry and needs in the field, while also leaving us the freedom to stay on the research and academic track.
Excellent, thank you. Are there other questions from the participants, either typed or spoken? We still have about a minute or so. Perhaps as we wait for another question, maybe Dr. Mbua and Dr. Jingo, can you maybe address the role of mentorship and mentoring? Dowdy, you mentioned mentoring and how you look forward to an opportunity for that, but maybe can you explain how you yourself may have been mentored and how that has led to your place now?
Right. It's something that you're definitely right, that I recognize in my own progress, right from around post undergraduate. I got a lot of mentorship by people, you know, in different geographies, really, both here in Uganda and in other places, not least the US, but also the UK, who, you know, finishing my undergrad, bioinformatics at the time was not something that was really on the horizon. But one of the best advice and mentorship I ever got was by somebody who pointed me in that direction and said, well, if you have a biological background and are interested in computing, then maybe there's this new field. So something as basic as being pointed in the right direction can be immensely consequential. And of course, in terms of skills and research ability, I got a lot of mentorship, both from my professor on the PhD, but also from just conferences and seminars, which are a typical part of a type of schedule where you meet a lot of people and talk to a lot of people and get a lot of advice in how to approach all these different things. So it's something that has definitely been very, very key. And it's something that I see myself now doing a lot because of what our system is. There's not many people, and there's a lot of young people that are needing help and being pointed in the right direction.
That's great. Thank you very much for your responses. I'd like to thank again Dr. Jingo and Dr. Mbua for their participation in this section of our roundtable today. We'll have an opportunity to revisit this topic and ask additional questions. Some did roll in while we were speaking, but let's move on to our next topic for now. Our next topic is called New PI, Tips for Balancing Teaching and Research. And this topic will be addressed by Dr. Alia Benkala and Dr. Rosaline Macharia. And again, we refer everyone to the booklet describing the accomplishments and credentials of our speakers. Suffice it to say that they are accomplished scientists, and we recognize their expertise. Dr. Benkala, why don't you go ahead and begin?
Hi, everybody. So this is me, Alia Benkala. I am bioinformatics at the Institute Pasteur of Tunis. I'm a researcher. I'm not teaching. or I don't have I don't have to go teaching. It's a choice. So, but since I'm in the institute since 15 years, and I was very lucky because I was the first bioinformatician that went back to the country, to Tunisia. So to be able to start bioinformatics and to develop bioinformatics in the country, I needed to go, for example, of course, as Daudi said, look for funding. But at one point, I discovered that funding is not enough. So I needed to go training at the university to be able to find good quality PhD students. They are very important for the career development and the development of bioinformatics. Therefore, I needed to learn how to balance research, teaching with administrative duties. So I don't know how it is elsewhere, but here administrative duties are quite painful. So from my experience during the last 15 years, I can give you 4 tips. Tip number 1, which is maybe not the most straightforward one, it's essential to be able to organize your time. And first thing, you need to invest in an agenda. So I went from different solutions of agenda. So I went to the online agenda. You try to use the online agenda, didn't work for me, but for some people it works. But at the end, I ended by buying a small agenda, paper agenda that I can carry all over with me. And this worked very well. And also, to be able to manage your time, I recommend everybody to find a good secretary that helps organizing the time and paperwork, which is very important duties. So this was the tip number 1. So now for the teaching duties. So the objective is to identify a way to reduce the time you need to spend on preparing your teaching material. So tip number 2, from what I think, you have plenty of material out in the internet. So don't reinvent the wheel, because you have training material which will be done much more better than, and if you do a synthesize of what is existing in the internet, it's very important. But please don't forget to acknowledge that you do use them. Tip number 3 will be bring your research into your teaching. This facilitate preparing the teaching material. And this enable you, because as you are doing research in these subjects, this enable you to communicate your passion to the students, and which will make them wanting doing their research with you, because students are very important for development of research. You need to find good students and to make them love what you are doing to be able to do good research. So communicate your passion to your student. Try your best to do, and you can do it by using your research or by using the research you are doing to develop your training material. Tip number 4, I think it's very important one, is learn how to delegate training. A well-trained PhD student can be a very good training assistant. And he can even take over some training. And once, this will help you to learn him some basic knowledge in bioinformatics. For my case, it's in bioinformatics, but delegating the training to teaching to your PhD students can be very good to learn them how to do better their research.
Well, Dr. Bankala, thank you so much for sharing these tips and your preparation. That obviously you've learned how to execute these things in your own career, and I really love the way you've been able to encapsulate those for us. I'm afraid we need to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Rosaline Macharia, but we'll have an opportunity to ask Dr. Bankala some questions in just a few moments.
Hello, thank you, Darren. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll give my experience, what I've done in teaching and research, and how I've been able to balance. Just to say that I've been privileged to handle very few students because I work in a center that only has master's and PhD students. So my largest class has been 15. So I think this has worked to my advantage, because when you have a smaller class, then it is easier for you to have time to do your research. So just as my colleague mentioned, one of the things that has really helped me into balancing the teaching and research is planning out my time. So I have specific time for teaching as well as specific time for research. And because our university has got different campuses, what I do is that the time I'm supposed to do my research, I don't have to come to my campus because I live next to another campus. So I take advantage and prepare my my classes and do my research write-ups away from the place of work, so that I can ensure that there's no interruption for that time that I've set out to do my research. Then the other thing that I've found very important is to have priorities. So in terms of research, I have made sure that I don't engage in any type of research. I do collaborate, but then I prioritize what I want to work on. And this has really helped me to have a clear way of doing the research. One of the other things that have really helped in my teaching is using my research data sets in my teaching. So the data sets that I use for training or for teaching in class are actually derived from some of my research projects. So I don't have to go and look for materials elsewhere. I can just use my data sets. And then the other thing is to always give students a chance. So in case I introduce a topic, what I've adopted is the problem-based learning. I give them a problem, they solve it, and then we discuss later, other than just coming to teach, define what the topic is all about. I start it with the problem, they solve the problem, and then I can fill the gap. So this leaves me with a lot of time. And I think it has also helped my students because they gain confidence when they are presenting some of these topics to the others. I would say that one of the things that I've not done so well is, or rather I've had challenges, is when I finished my PhD and joined the center, I thought that it was very easy for me to start my research group and do this together with teaching, but I realized that I had no sense of direction. I was engaging in different types of projects. So I like my other colleagues talked about, I quickly realized that I needed a mentor to walk with me through my journey. And I can say that this has actually helped me in balancing these two, because you have to clearly know why am I writing a research grant, or which research grant am I going to apply for. So mentorship has really helped me. So I can say that the tips for balancing this is know what you want, clearly demarcate the time you have. If you don't have a secretary like earlier, what you can do is you can use your Google Calendar and ensure that you clearly demarcate the time you want to do your research and the time that you want to teach. Thank you.
Wow, well, thank you. These are excellent summaries and tips that have been given. I am hearing already a pattern or a certain repetition of topics, such as managing time, using a calendar, separating research and teaching, and especially finding mentorship. I'd like to open again the floor, and please do not wait for me to open the floor. If you have questions, please type them into the chat window so that we can be prepared right away to be able to ask your question. Looks like there's a question. Please go ahead.
I can't hear.
We hear you. Please go ahead.
So for me, how to ensure you have to have constant funding? I will respond this way. It's statistical. So for me, usually people are successful 20% of the time, or maybe 25% of the time. So to be able to have constant funding, you have to write grants and continue writing. Even if you are not successful, you will learn how to write better, and you can ensure that you will have some continuity on your funding.
You know, that is such an interesting part of academic science, and frankly science in general, is that there's a entrepreneurial aspect to science. In other words, making sure to have that constant funding. You're always looking for the next grant. In fact, there was a question, how do you do that? How do you ensure that you have constant funding? Is it just that you're writing grants all the time? That doesn't sound like the kind of science that I was sold when I started my studies. Can you help us understand?
So from my side, so I'm not writing grants all the time. But for example, I had this H3A Barnett funding. I'm H3A Barnett PI, which lasted 10 years. It's about $50,000 per year, which is, for me, for my needs, it's quite good enough. And there is this funding. So for 10 years, I didn't really need to write grants. But since I know that in 3 years or 2 years from now, H3A Barnett will not be anymore there, I went back maybe 6 months ago to writing grants. And also I have this funding from the local Ministry of Research that enable me to fund my basic research that I want to do. But I have the H3A Barnett for other stuff. And since I know that the H3A Barnett funding is ending, I started writing grants maybe 1 year ago. And I already have one funding.
Right. Right. A quick rejoinder to that, Alia. Thank you so much for that. One of the other things that I'm realizing, especially in our environment here, is that on top of writing grants is really the idea of collaboration. So it's not that every grant that you're involved in, you necessarily have to be a PI, but you can be a key personnel in several other ways. And so collaboration becomes a very important and key aspect of grantsmanship, so to speak. And one example is for our system here is what Darrell's group has been able to do for us in terms of infrastructure. We didn't have to write a classic or typical grant, but it was just the idea of properly collaborating with institutions like those to attract value into our orbit, so to speak.
So in Tunisia, I don't know how it is elsewhere, to become PI, to evolve in your career, you need to have this grant as PI or as a collaborator. So you need to participate to building your grant, to bring funding to your institution. This is essential.
Well, maybe can we expand on that just a little bit? If you don't have to be the PI on a grant, and if all you're doing is collaborating, is it possible? I mean, if you are you said key personnel, does that mean that you get a portion of the grant money? How does that work?
Correct. It can take multiple forms. One, the first is that it's not that it is still important to be PI as much as possible. That should be first priority. Definitely. But in terms of the question of how to make sure you always have some sort of funding, I think being PI is good supplement that with collaborations and being able to push your skills other PIs. And you're right, Darryl, one way that happens is either you can be a sub-grantee on a major grant, or you may not be a direct sub-grantee, but you might just sort of consult and that sort of thing. And so, yes, it's having the right mix of both, because the collaborations also make it more likely for you to have your own independent grants.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Paulina Tendana from Ghana. Just wanted to contribute to the discussion. So it's very interesting to hear Aliyah and the other speaker talk about how to balance teaching and research. We're a bit interested in knowing how, in terms of your employment, if I use our example here in Ghana, when you are employed as a lecturer, senior lecturer, even associate professor, you are given a percentage of your time to spend on teaching, and a percentage on research, and a percentage on what they call service. And that's when you serve on under academic boards or other international advisory boards. And so sometimes the challenge is how you calculate your 60% teaching. Because depending on the number of students that you are that enroll during the year, you end up spending 100% of your time teaching. And then depending on how many grants that you have in a particular year, you might end up spending more of your time actually doing your research as well. Because as you all know, there are some seasons where you have, depending on the number of grants that you've submitted, you can get all of them funded if you are lucky. So in that case, you have to end up trying to struggle between the various grants that you have to contribute to. And there are other seasons where you've put in several grant applications and then none are successful. So you don't end up actually doing any research during that period. From your experience, how is that similar to what I've described, and how have you been able to really calculate the amount of time you spend on teaching and the amount of time you spend on research, and ensuring that you are delivering or providing value to both areas as well?
So if you have 30% of, you have to spend 30% of teaching. Spend 30%. It's another thing. You spend 30% of teaching. You don't. The university cannot ask you to spend more of time doing teaching, because by contract you are supposed to do 30%, spend your or 60% of your time on teaching. So I will not go until 100%. And I'm not teaching, but I have teaching. I do some teaching, as I said, because I need students. But my colleagues, what they do also, you can replace your teaching here. You can replace your teaching hours by supervising hours. Or when you do teaching for master degree, you spend 1 hour in for license training. Is 1 hour in master degree is 3 hours in for license training teaching. So you can balance this way, try to reduce your teaching time this way. But people here, they don't take more than the 60% they are supposed to. And if they do it, it's their choice.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your comments and participation. I'd like to especially thank Dr. Vankala and Dr. Macharia for their remarks and the other questions that have come in. Again, I encourage you to put your questions in the chat or to simply speak up at the time. We do need to move on to our next topic. And I actually think that some of what we've heard already applies directly here, right? The idea of writing grants and having an entrepreneurial mindset. So our next topic is called a social entrepreneurial approach to biomedical research. And our two speakers today are a little bit different in that they have not followed exactly the traditional academic track, and I'm looking forward to their remarks. First, Mr. Chris Whalen, and then Mr. Mutembesa. So Chris, I think you're first. Why don't you go ahead?
All right, thanks, Daryl. So as Daryl mentioned, I'm not really a scientist. I started out working in the laboratory supporting IT equipment for research, and did that for roughly 10 years before starting my own company. And it was my really enjoyment of being around scientists and about being around science itself that really led me to decide to start a company. And when I started the company, I set it up as a social benefit corporation, which is sort of a new trend here in the United States and some other countries, that states or governments are allowing a new form of business that's you incorporate as a company, and then you give something back to the community or to the society. And so what we have to do in a social benefit corporation here in the US is to give something back by contributing. And so what we do for that is we contribute to the scientific community by taking on other people who are doing development work in science and research. So, software development, or supporting some of the collaborative packages that we help develop with some of the nonprofit organizations and research organizations around the world. But it's a lot like being a PI in many ways. I'm very familiar with what it means to be a PI, and it is very entrepreneurial to be a successful PI. You just as writing contract proposals, writing grants, it takes the same amount of time. And you're constantly trying to look for new ways to, or new sponsors for research, or new sponsors for contracts. But the other thing I think also that I've seen both in the PIs that I work with and in the other companies that support researchers is that you have to be ready to adjust to what's needed. So, for example, when I started, I was doing just basic connectivity for African researchers and setting up satellite connections. And as, time developed and fiber optic cables and mobile networks started, the needs of my customers changed. The needs became more, how do we collect the data? How do we run bioinformatics equipment in remote places in Africa? And so we adjusted what we do to meet those needs. And I've seen the same thing happening in science, where there are grants are being offered in data science all of a sudden, or supplements to existing grants, and they researchers that started out doing straight biology are now doing bioinformatics, or looking for people who can help them with bioinformatics grants. So I guess I'll close with, it's a lot of work, and you need to be flexible and adjust to what's needed by your sponsors or your customers.
Wow, thanks very much, Chris. That's very insightful. I certainly appreciate all of the experience that you have, and the flexibility that you've demonstrated over many years. I'd like to welcome now Mutembesa. You have some experience both in an academic setting as well as in kind of an entrepreneurial, or at the very least an applied kind of science. So please go ahead.
So thank you very much. Happy to be here, and happy to be sharing this session with Chris. So my name is Mutembesa Daniel, and again, I lead collaborations here at the AI Lab in Uganda. I've also had my experience about 7 years or so working within a socio-entrepreneur setting within conservation of intangible cultural heritage, that is music, arts, festivals, and the like. So really making sure that the revenues are tied to some social cause, like conservation of intangible cultural heritage. Here at the lab, just to introduce and give you a picture of how we view social entrepreneurship, though we are in a government or a public setting, the lab has a three-part strategy in this social entrepreneurship kind of direction, and I lead collaborations in that angle. The first is finding a problem that is with a local context. And once that problem has been identified with stakeholders, then you try and combine whatever methods that there are here in artificial intelligence or machine learning or data science with these unconventional or data sets that we get. And the third particular pathway for that strategy is you collaboratively work with the beneficiaries so that you maximize the societal value of your innovation. So basically, just to give an oversight of entrepreneurship, because I've had experience from both sides, both in research, scientific research, and non-scientific research. The idea is to find a positive return for the society that you're working with. So all the innovations, all the funding, all the ideas that you're developing have to have this positive societal return at the heart of it. And this can take many forms. Chris, who's the co-panelist on this, mentioned what is known as a hybrid setup, where governments are allowing private entrepreneurships to sort of provide services that can that have a direct revenue income, but pushing that revenue back into a societal goal. Some things to think about, especially for the people attending, is if you're looking to go non-profit within a setting of government or public, sustainable funding pathways are a very, very, very critical issue. If you're looking to go for profit, then you have to think about tying a very good societal cause to your revenue streams. Key components that I would like to speak about just before my time is done is the first thing that you want to make sure is to have a beneficiary list or a stakeholders list. In the aspect of bioinformatics science, this could be clinics, these could be end users of user test kits. So having a beneficiaries or a stakeholders list is extremely important, no matter which part of your career you are, whether you're in early stage career or late stage career. This ensures that there is a good value proposition. And when I talk about value proposition, I'm always looking at things to do with that are in context to the beneficiary, things to do with like low-cost tools, which is a very big context for us here at the AI Lab. Again, these ideas can always be shared across. So again, thank you very much. I'll be looking forward to hearing your comments.
Wow. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments, and especially the sense of business acumen that you've described here. Again, this is a part of science that I never really anticipated or thought of. I somehow thought during my training that business was this grand ivory tower, or that science, that is, was this grand ivory tower of ideals and pure science. But I've learned that no matter what path one takes in science, whether it be a traditional academic track or something a little bit different, that a good mind for business seems to be very important. Again, we have about 5 minutes for questions from the audience. Certainly welcome those questions to come in at this point. Feel free to simply speak up or type your question in the chat. But perhaps as we begin, can Chris and Mutembesa, can you maybe help us to understand some of the pitfalls that one should avoid in the approach that you've taken? What things, if you could go back and do them again, would you maybe try to avoid?
Daniel, do you want to go first?
Take it away, Chris. I'll compliment.
I mean, it's really about the, I would say probably the rabbit holes, you know, like avoiding going down into certain places where there is no possible return. I mean, if you spend a lot of time developing a capability that there's no customers or no sponsors for, then it's really, you know, it may have served the purpose of, you know, satisfying your curiosity and your scientific interest, but it's not going to get funding, or it's not going to be something that, you know, customers are going to be interested in buying. So it's really important to be careful to avoid those. Even, I mean, and I think that's both in research and in entrepreneurship.
How do you recognize when you're going down that rabbit hole?
Maybe when you're talking about it to somebody and they don't seem to understand what you're talking about. I mean, I think that can also be a couple of things. It can be that you're not framing it properly and you have to learn how to describe it better, or it can be that there's just not anybody interested in working on that. It's a delicate balance, I have to say.
Absolutely, Chris. Absolutely. So in my two fronts of experience within social entrepreneurship, I think one of the things that we tend to avoid very much here is government skewed projects. And so that's been one of the mistakes. I think there's a lot of work now within the bioinformatic, or, you know, the biomedical field that is allowing or setting up infrastructure. I mean, we have now the ACE in, you know, in the 2 centers within Africa. You should not avoid these things, because they offer the first and the most immediate value proposition for hybrid entrepreneurship, where you're looking to do both revenue and societal return kind of projects. So for the people attending particularly this session, I think, you know, don't avoid, you know, government sort of government program. And again, here governments are usually seeking your expertise because they've failed to or they don't have the capacity to take on or fulfill a certain project. Yeah, that's the first one. The second pitfall is collaborative development. So within specific low resource settings or resource constrained settings, if you do not work with the end user from the get-go to collaboratively and iteratively develop an innovation, you are bound to hit a very high barrier of adoption.
Yeah. That's very good insight. And in fact, it's one of the things that I'm so impressed with, the artificial intelligence lab there at Makerere. The idea of having something that is applied and customized for the end user, whether that be the customer, the stakeholder, whatever, you know, or even the grant itself, making sure that you address the topic of the grant and not just what you happen to be curious about. Earlier, Dr. Mbua talked about a certain degree of academic freedom, and I think that certainly that's an ideal, but I think also the reality is that we can really only research what we get funded to do, whether that funding come from a grant or whether that funding come through other means. I think at this point, I'd like to move on to our last topic for the session, and thank you very much.
There was a question in the chat box.
There was? Oh, I missed it then. Yes.
Yes.
I think that question is probably more for Daniel than for me.
The question is, how easy is it to work in the private sector in terms of bioinformatics and data science? And another question, I understand there's a plan in Uganda to set up a national data center. Do you have plans to understand their needs and how the center can benefit, how your center can benefit from that opportunity? Daniel, why don't you take maybe just 2 minutes at this point to address these questions. Hopefully you can see them in the chat, and then we'll return to them at the end as we have time.
I'll probably take a moment and we'll come back to them. Is that correct?
Yes, please. Just maybe take a minute or two to address these, and then we'll come back if time allows.
Okay, so maybe I'll highlight on some of these. So Rita says, how is it easy to work with the private sector in terms of bioinformatics and data science? So right now, something that is extremely real. So we haven't had the opportunity of extending some of our services to the private sector because there isn't any infrastructure that sort of allows a research lab that is within a university setting to do this. But we have set up a non-profit called Sunbird AI, and this is a strategy that can also be used within the bioinformatics and data science. And what this Sunbird AI is going to be a non-profit that is able to take research that has been proven in terms of proof of concept within the laboratory setting, and then implement it with an outreach or society. And one of them has been this air quality sensing, which we're doing under engineer, sort of do proof of concept and then have push it to another intermediary that can translate it into end-to-end actionable with some beneficiaries, with some proper business case. Thank you. And then the second one is the National Data Center. So the National Data Center, I think there's a task force that has been set up known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution Task Force. And we are on that task force. We are contributing our ideas about who it will serve, how it should serve the country. Definitely, you have to have all people on the team.
Great. Thank you so much, Mutembes. I really appreciate your insight and willingness to answer these questions again. Thanks to you both. We've moved into definitely non-traditional careers, non-academic careers, or at least different kind of academic. The idea of going from PhD to postdoc to professor, right? Let's look at some of the other opportunities that exist. This will be our final topic, which is called non-traditional careers for scientists, ethics, communications, lab manager. And to address these topics, we have Christine Kanyengo, as well as Jantina De Vries and Paulina Tindana. Again, I refer you to the information packet to see the accomplishments and credentials of our speakers and render them all appropriate honors. But please, let's go ahead and begin with Christine, if you would please address us.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. So I am a librarian at the University of Zambia, and most often I get asked by parents, relatives, what is the best career for their child or maybe indeed their relative to pursue. And I always say that I think a career is as good as you apply it. Speaking for myself, I always wanted to work in a library. So from high school, I applied to the University of Zambia, and I did pursue studies in library and information science. Then I also did postgraduate studies at the University of Cape Town. But what I can say about a career as a librarian or information scientist, it is basically the idea that you are going to work with everyone. If you are in a university setting, for instance, you work with people who are in medicine, who are in biology, who are in veterinary medicine. So it's how you are going to apply what you have learned, the skills, the theories, to suit the customer base that you're dealing with. Remember, this is a career where you are saying you want to assist in whatever community that you are based in. So you need to make sure that you apply some kind of customer service skills to be able to satisfy the needs of your particular constituencies. Additionally, you also need to know a bit of a certain subject. And nowadays, I know like in the US, which we don't do in Zambia, people do study particular disciplines. For instance, they would have done biology before they go to library school, or they would have done mathematics and then they go to library school. And indeed, within our work environment here at the University of Zambia, we have people that have done mathematics or history, etc. Although those were by accident, really our training here at the University of Zambia, it's mostly library school. But other people who have trained somewhere, who have joined us, they have done a particular subject before they've done librarianship. In addition, also, you need to be focused. I think for myself, when I finished studies, I said I'm going to work in an academic environment, and I just joined the University of Zambia. So it's within the University of Zambia where I developed my skills, my confidence, and also to be able to work with everyone within the institution. Additionally, librarianship is a career that I think now with the environment that we are in, which is increasingly very digital, you find that it is very versatile. You can work in almost every environment, especially when you have combined it with library skills and computer science. And I can urge some of the people that are on this program to do some particular courses in maybe computer science, because that then expands their horizon. Also, what I've noticed is that I think most of the time, especially if you are working in the library, people always lack confidence, maybe not just the library, but I think in every profession. You need to have the confidence to be able to apply your skills so that when you meet with anyone, you'll be able to say, look, this is the skills that I bring to this position. This is the skills that I have to be able to assist you to achieve your objectives. I think that's what I can say about someone who wants a career as a librarian.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Oh, you said something else?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you. And like I say, we'll have questions in just a few moments, but let's hear now from our second of the three speakers, Dr. Gentina de Vries.
Hi everyone. So my career has been quite different. So it's quite funny for me that this is called a non-traditional career for scientists, because I think people in ethics do their own training, just like a previous speaker who's actually trained as a librarian. But they're non-traditional careers in science, I think, and that's definitely true. So my journey has been that I trained originally as a sociologist, was always very fascinated by science and genetics and genomics in particular. So I've been working in that field for a long time, and then did a PhD in bioethics, and then moved to the University of Cape Town, where I had a postdoc, and then I started being a PI on some of my grants, and I'm now an associate professor in bioethics. I just want to say a few words about kind of stuff that people have already spoken about. One is sort of a comment around grant writing, and I want to say that yes, it is true to some extent that you become a manager, but if it appeals to you, if this is something that you like doing, then grant writing is also really quite incredible, because you get to imagine a place that doesn't yet exist. Like, it's an extremely creative process, and it's very exciting. And you can create opportunities for people. So your students, your staff, like, you can really create wonderful opportunities. So this is not something to be intimidated by. It's something to possibly enjoy. Then my other feeling is that don't worry too much, because it's not like you start off thinking about your career and having to find millions and millions of dollars to keep your team going. You start off small. And so really for people to enjoy where they're at and to find opportunities that are fit for purpose. So previously we spoke about, what do you do to become a PI? And I would say take it slowly, because once you're a PI, there's no going back. And so the longer you can stay in these kind of, for instance, in postdoc roles, I think being a postdoc can be quite a lot of fun, and it gives you a lot of freedom. And the moment you move up, you get more responsibility, and you lose some of what is really exciting in doing the science. And then for me, kind of crafting an academic career is really about following your passion. And I think this is what the previous speaker also emphasized, is understand why you're trying to do what you're doing and follow your passion, and then do all those smart things, then find all the opportunities, identify courses, identify things that you can do to boost your CV, but don't compromise what it is that you really want to be doing simply because it makes sense. Because if you follow your passion, you're probably also quite good at what you're doing. And so that's the kind of people that will get the grants, that will get the opportunities. And then realize that as you go along and as you build your CV, you become more and more attractive. And so don't be guided by fear. Starting from a position of fear and intimidation about this is so big and where do I go doesn't help. Start small, and build yourself up as you go along. So it's really kind of trying to give some encouragement and realize that the field, there isn't that much competition yet. So if you're strong, and if you find opportunities that are fit for where you are, this is something that everyone can do.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Dr. DeVries. I really appreciate your perspective, and especially this idea of, I think what I at least heard, it was the idea of consistency, right? That you don't have to necessarily climb the mountain in one go, but by taking step after step, you make it to the top.
Definitely, yeah. So take it small and enjoy the process, and don't try to be where your PI is at now, because they took years to get there. Or don't try to start up the company and expect it to be big tomorrow.
Familiar, aroma. This is usually just that. Yeah. No, it's not very good. What's happening?
I'm afraid. So I'm seeing. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Didn't catch quite the last thing that you said there, Dr. DeVries.
No, it was just your point, but it was affirming what you were saying, which is really don't look at people where they're at today, and don't expect to be there tomorrow, because it took years for them to build the career, for them to build the companies, for them to build the profile. But do follow what really excites you, because that's what will sustain you over time.
Fantastic, thank you. Our final speaker for the panel, before we open it up for, we follow up on previous topics and open it up for general questions, was Dr. Paulina Tindana from Ghana. And again, you can read about her, you can read her brief biography in the attachment that came through, but why don't you please go ahead, Dr. Tindana, and give us your thoughts.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Great.
Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'd like to just trace back to 30 years ago when I was trying to decide on a career path. The secondary school that I went to, which currently is called high school, was in a rural part of northern Ghana. And
Dr. Tindana, we may have lost your audio. Hello? Paulina? Hello, Paulina. Paulina, I'm afraid we've lost you. It looks like she just fell offline. It's unfortunate. We've had good luck so far on this video conference to have lost our last speaker at just as she began. Kind of tragic. Perhaps as we wait for Paulina Tindana to rejoin us, maybe if I could ask, for these kind of non-traditional careers, not the hardcore bioinformatics or biomedical researcher, what is the career path? I noticed, for example, for Christine Kenyengo, that Christine, you started, I think, as a medical librarian and now have been promoted to the university librarian. How did that all work?
Yes.
What kind of things happened to allow you to grow in that way?
Okay, so in our environment, when you are employed as a librarian, you are considered as faculty, so you're an academic member of staff. So the same rules and regulations that govern promotion for a member of faculty staff also applies. But in my case, I had to obviously fulfill the certain criteria within the University of Zambia, but also you need to do research, you need to publish before you can be promoted. And I followed those rules and regulations.
I see. So in other words, there's no free lunch.
No, there's no free lunch. You have to, like the other speakers have said, you have to work very hard. And you know, when you are in an academic setting, most of the rules apply to everyone. So you have to follow what is existing within that particular environment.
Very good. Thank you. I had perhaps a quick question for Gentina, perhaps. How did you mentioned you had kind of an interesting career path or an educational path, that you followed one thing and then went back to get a PhD in the bioethics. How did you determine that's what you wanted to do? How did you know the right way to go?
So I wonder, I think Paulina is back online, at least I see. So just my response to that, and I think maybe Paulina would say a similar thing. I think it's never been quite intentional. So, and I don't know how many of the other speakers on the call would share that same idea, but these careers are not like you start today and you expect to be somewhere 30 years from now. You start somewhere and then you encounter something else and you figure out that that's where you want to go. And that's how it works, right? You don't end up, or at least I don't think many people end up saying 1 year, I want to be this particular person doing this particular thing. And so for me, I started off studying biology and did that for a couple of years and just realized that I was actually much more interested in the kind of philosophy of science questions than I was in the actual science. And so that's where that journey started for me. But I think that's true for, you know, many different people have got a story like that.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, this is Chris. I wanted to add to something you said earlier, actually, Yantina. It's just that idea that you have that passion, because if you have a passion for something that you're doing, it really sustains you through those times when you have to get through, you know, a lot, you know, writing grants, spending a huge amount of time invested in writing proposals or whatever it is. There are going to be times that you have a sort of a low ebb of enthusiasm for what you're doing at that moment, but if you have an overall passion for what you do, I think that's the most important thing.
Hello?
Hello, Paulina, is that you again?
Sorry, I got disconnected. I was praising the power of the internet and it failed me.
Oh, no. Well, why don't you please go ahead and take the time, the next 3 minutes or so, and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I just started talking about how I got into bioethics in the first place. And you can see it's a long history. But just to say that just 2 years ago, after I had completed my PhD and had gone back to the institution that I've worked with for 20 years, I felt the need to move more to a more academic institution. One of the challenges that I encountered was that I was working in an institution that relied heavily on funding to support salaries, funding to keep people in jobs. And for me, that was really challenging because you had no time to even reflect because you were always thinking about when the next grant is going to come and how to actually maintain the few people that you've been able to begin to mentor. And so that's what actually pushed me from moving from a research-oriented institution, mainly doing research 100%, to moving into the university where currently I'm supposed to spend 60% teaching, 30% research, and I'm also supposed to spend 10% doing what they call service, and that is serving on boards and then also on committees. And for me, as I mentioned earlier during my contribution to the earlier discussion, I have struggled a bit with trying to find the right balance because currently I supervise 7 master's students and 7 PhD students. And that I teach 3 courses per semester. And that is even based on 60% of the time I'm supposed to spend. And then I also have grants that I work on, 3 grants that currently I work on. So it's been quite a challenge trying to find the right balance where, yes, you want to be able to make sure you are mentoring people well through your supervision, and yet to be able to move to the next stage, you are required to bring in grants, you are required to publish, and you're also required to serve. But what has driven me, and then I think I also agree with the point Yantina made earlier, is doing what we are passionate about, doing something that you love doing. And I think for me, working with communities and being able to do some empirical work where I'm asking people about their views, about current research practices, what they consider to be the best consent models, what is best in terms of engaging communities, and being passionate about even how people express themselves, express their views about research, has really been encouraging. I think that's what has actually pushed me throughout my career. So despite the challenges, we're trying to find a balance. I think being able to enjoy working on the subject that I'm passionate about has really helped me a lot. And I've also been quite lucky. Of course, as humans, you sometimes work in projects that you have disagreements with, and that doesn't sometimes go well. But sometimes you just tend to focus more on what you love doing, focus more on it, surround people who inspire you. And I think that's what has helped me a lot. Working with people that I love working with, where I can actually learn from their experience, has really been quite helpful. And I think one lesson I've also learned over the years is that when I first started as an IRB administrator, I always saw scientists as, well, the bad people who always want blood and want to publish and get away with it. And my role was to make sure they do the right thing. But then over the years, I've learned that we all scientists, ethicists, we all want the same thing. We want to advance science, but we want to do it in an ethical way. And to be able to be constructive in your ethics deliberations, you really need to also understand the science. And so that's why increasingly we are seeing science and ethics and engagement being embedded in big scientific projects, because we need to work together to be able to make sure that the science that we do is ethical and that the science that we do actually leads to benefits the communities and participants who are involved in this. And then the third thing I also want to say is that I often don't see myself as a scientist or a social scientist removed from the communities that I work with. I work in the communities that I belong. So I see myself as part of that community. And so what I do, people see the face of the science in what I do in the communities. And so for me, that is what has actually also motivated me, knowing that what I do is actually being appreciated by the communities that I work with. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful, Paulina. Thank you so much for your participation. I really like what you said about seeing yourself as part of the community, and I would connect that with the ideas that we came up with earlier, the idea of making sure that there's a customer service perspective, that we make sure that we're serving the correct beneficiaries, make sure that there's a value proposition to what we're doing, to prioritizing our time and our efforts to make sure that we're doing those things that that both we love and that can also get funded. That came up one of the questions that's on the chat as we just finish out our session. This is from Rita saying, have you found challenges in finding opportunities to try? Sometimes, let me say it this way, there are a lot of passionate actors in Los Angeles and New York who are passionate about acting, but most of them are not working in acting. So how do we find things that we're passionate about doing, but can also get funded to do? And here I open up the floor to all of our all of our panelists. Please do feel free to address it. We only have a few minutes though, so please keep your remarks brief.
So Daryl, this is Jantina. So obviously there's a self-selection bias here, right? Because people who are speaking on this call are the ones who manage to survive. So Rita, in response to your question, I think what's really important is to understand that there is a core thing that drives you, and then that can manifest in different ways, right? So Paulina spoke about the core thing being communities, right, and engaging with communities and ensuring research is ethical. For me, I think it's about capacity building oftentimes, and it's about capacity and ethics. And so those things manifest in different ways, right? So if this opportunity, I think it was Alia who said, you know, if you know that 20% of the time you'll be successful, you write 5 grants, but all of them touch on some of those core things that you love doing.
Yes, so just to add to that, I want to just contribute to a point that Rolanda has made here, and that's the importance of mentorship. So when I started my submission, I talked about the challenges with even deciding what career path to take. And so it's always helpful if you are passionate about something, you start doing something about it. So you start speaking about it, so for me, my focus on community engagement actually came up when, based on my passion for it and my engagement in the community, going to conferences and workshops and speaking about it. And it is through those networking that I was able to get mentors who believed in me and who gave me opportunities to thrive. So for me, I think mentorship is very important, making sure that you have someone who believes in that dream and someone who is willing to support you through that process and help you navigate even the challenges as they come.
I'd like to follow up on one last question that came up earlier. The idea of, we just talked about maybe writing a bunch of different grants with the hope that at least something will get funded. Is there some kind of practical maximum? Like if I would write 20 grants, is that too many? If I write just one, that's probably not enough. Where is the sweet spot for the number of grants? And I say this only because the time is up at this point, and I was hoping to get a quick response. I don't mean to cut us all off, but we should observe the time. So if there's any thoughts about that, and certainly, and then I'll try to close the session.
Daryl,
hey, Daryl.
has Dr. response.
No, I'm just saying I actually don't have the magic number to offer. I'm just going to say that I think that involves a bit of the kind of temperature you feel around the reviews that you get. So I might write the 20th grant, but still feel like I'm getting closer based on the reviews and the vibe and the momentum around it, and what are the things I've added to my career. Or I might write the 3rd or 4th, but actually realize that the basic ingredients are not there. So I think part of that is a judgment of where you are and how close you feel you are. I'm sorry, I'm not offering a specific number.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think I'm afraid our time is up and I need to close the session. But I want to once again thank all of our panelists for their expert opinion, for their careers and lives that they've lived and the example that they've given to us. I thank them also for the wisdom they've shared about managing time and finding mentors and networking, prioritizing, following passion in ways that will be sustainable. I'd also like to thank Rolanda and the rest of the organizers of the H3Africa meeting for pushing forward through this very difficult and challenging time. I want to thank the participants who have come and offered their questions and their thoughts, who have, I hope, benefited from the things that have been said. I know that I've taken some notes here and hope to share them back to the organizers, and perhaps they'll be shared out. Let me offer just one last thought, and that is for myself, what I have learned about education and training is that the training doesn't necessarily, if you train, for example, to be a microbiologist, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a microbiologist for the rest of your life. It could be, and that'd be just fine. But often the skills that are picked up in training for one career are transferable. And those skills are certainly about problem solving, about starting and finishing, completing, being successful at completing a project, as well as, again, learning how to learn. Those are transferable skills that will serve in any which way that a trainee decides to move forward. So with that, I think that I'll close the session, and again, thank everybody, and look forward to seeing you perhaps at the next H3Africa meeting in person. For now, though, thanks, and
thank
see you next time.
All right, thanks, Daryl, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.